Today I'm giving you my two favorite macro photography setups so you're going to be covered in any situation shooting great macro. Whether you're a run and gun shooter that likes to have full flexibility in less than ideal conditions, or you like to set up here in the studio and take full control over your subject with your light, well, we're going to talk about all that. And the good news is it doesn't matter what budget you're on or your experience level, we got something for everybody. Let's get started. So this is my first setup here, and all it entails is a little tripod, of course my camera with a macro lens, and something called a macro rail. This is going to let me do fine adjustments, which is really important because if you know macro, we're often dealing with really high magnifications, which can result in a depth of field of a fraction of an inch. So being precise is incredibly important. The macro rail just lets us be that much more precise. And when it comes to photo stacking, which we'll cover in another video, it's absolutely essential. Now this particular macro lens will set you back over $1,000 US. So if that's not in the cards or you're not sure if you want to jump into the macro scene, consider getting something called an extension tube. All this is really going to do is allow you to throw this on pretty much any lens that you have and essentially increase that magnification. It's going to work differently on every lens, but they are very cheap and can give you some decent results. There's also something like this close-up macro filter lens, and all you do is use the filter threads to screw it onto an existing lens to increase its magnification. So there are options for you if you don't want to fully invest in a macro lens. Again, they do come at a cost, and a lot of the time it's quality and overall ease of use, but there's options for you. So let's dive in and have a look at this setup and exactly what it's good for. So here's my first setup at work, and obviously there are a few advantages of having your camera on a tripod. One is the overall stability. You're not bouncing around like you do when you're handheld, and this lets you really dial in your composition, as well as because it's on a tripod and it's stable, you can use longer shutter speeds and really dial in your exposure regardless of what light source you have. Here's a few more examples of using this setup compared to a handheld setup that you'll see in a moment. Now in macro, we're typically dealing with very shallow depths of field, and I did mention focus stacking earlier. What that means is we take a bunch of photos of the same subject at different focus points, and we stack them all together to get a nice sharp image. Here's an example of a single photo taken with a very shallow depth of field, and here's several photos stacked and put together. Quite a significant difference, and for me, one of the main reasons to shoot with this setup. However, depending on your subject, it's not always the best choice. Here's a few more examples using a tripod before we look at our handheld setup. So here's our second setup, and this is our run and gun setup for when we have to be more flexible, when we don't have ideal lighting and we don't have access to a tripod. It consists of a camera, a lens, a flash, and some kind of diffusion so we can diffuse that light, making it really soft, getting a natural, more pleasing looking image. And that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and make this less than ideal when it comes to lighting and show you how we use this to control our subject. So here we are in some less than ideal light, and we're going to utilize the flash here to be able to control our shutter speed and keep our ISO as low as possible to still get a nice crisp and clean image. So let's have a look at what this looks like handheld compared to using a tripod. So here's what you can expect when you're hand holding, and at these magnifications it can be incredibly hard to be stable, and it's just going to be trial and error. You're probably going to have to take several photos to get what you're looking for because we're dealing with such a small depth of field. And again, I'm using a macro lens here, and this one has built-in image stabilization, so this is going to help a lot when you're hand holding. Here's an example of what that looks like with the image stabilization off. So that's another thing to consider if you are using a camera or a lens without image stabilization. If you are using extension tubes without electronic connections, you will also lose things like your image stabilization. So do keep that in mind. Here's a few shots that I took just showing you the difference that settings can make. Here I am just kind of messing with my flash exposure so I can really dial in that sweet spot. And again, your biggest challenge is getting everything in focus, but if I didn't use my flash, I would have to pump my ISO up to 3200 and lower my shutter speed to get the same exposure, Or if I wanted to leave my ISO at 100, I would have to have a shutter speed of half a second, which when hand-holding is of course impossible. Next I headed out to the garden to try and find you guys some real-world examples. And right now it's winter, so finding stuff might seem a little bit difficult, but honestly, if you're patient and you look hard enough, there are tiny, amazing little subjects everywhere. I think for me, the coolest thing about macro is that you never know what you're gonna find. There's an entire universe of unknowns waiting for us as soon as we pick up our lens and just look. Like I said before, one of the most important things here is patience, not just in your shooting, but actually looking for your subjects as well. Here on this little dead flower, I found a bug probably no bigger than 1 millimeter in size, and I never would have seen it if I wasn't just looking through the lens. It took me a few shots to get him in focus, but here he is. So because it was portable, I decided to bring the whole planter inside to see what else I could find. So I switched over to my original setup to see what I could come up with. So as I tinker around with my gear, my light, and my settings, it wasn't long until this little guy popped his head out from one of the flowers that was right in front of me the entire time. Here's how that turned out. There's something about macro photography for me that's just really rewarding. I think it's probably one of my favorite types of photography in general, and I like the challenge that it presents. It's a great way to get out of your comfort zone and see things from a completely new perspective. Macro is not just about shooting bugs. You can shoot food, plants, textures. It's endless, and the results will definitely surprise you. So there's my 2 favorite macro photography setups, and if you did want to buy any of the gear in this video, I will drop affiliate links down in the description for you. If you did like this video and you want to see more just like it, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and join the community. Like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.